Cletus Cassidy was born to Roscoe and Louise Cassidy in the Ravencroft Institute for the Criminally Insane. At only 19 minutes of age, Cletus would die due to complications involving his umbilical cord, but would be resurrected by the dark god Null. This event would instill a bloodlust in Cassidy that would last his entire life. This bloodlust would manifest early on when at the age of 6, Cletus pushed his grandmother down the stairs, killing her, as well as killing his mother's dog, Fifi. Upon seeing this, Louise would also be attacked but would gain the upper hand just when Roscoe would come home and see Louise try and kill Cletus and would kill her in response. However, when questioned by the cops, Cletus claimed that Roscoe had murdered her for no reason. Cletus would then be placed in an orphanage where he would murder one of the disciplinary staff, push a girl in front of a bus, and eventually burn down the building with most of the children still inside. As an adult, Cletus would become a notorious serial killer but would eventually be arrested and placed with a cell with supervillain Eddie Brock, otherwise known as Venom. The two would have a very antagonistic relationship, and eventually Cletus would plan to murder Eddie, but before he could, the Venom symbiote would return and rescue Brock. But as it left, the symbiote would give birth. This offspring would then bond with Cletus, and the two would become known as Carnage. Carnage would then break free and would go on a citywide killing spree before eventually being defeated by the combined efforts of Venom and Spider-Man. However, thanks to the symbiote, Carnage is constantly able to break free and continue murdering, and even after all these years, he is still one of the most deadly beings in the Marvel Universe. Shiro was born in Tokyo, Japan in the year 2012. Shortly after her birth, she would be placed in an orphanage for unknown reasons. At around a year old, she would be adopted by Sorei Igarashi to replace her son Ganta, who was going to be used as a test subject. Growing up alone in the facility, Shiro's early life would consist of nothing but tests and experiments followed by periods of isolation. That is, until she would meet Ganta Igarashi and the two would soon become close friends, sharing an admiration for the cartoon superhero Ace Man. Due to all the experiments, she would often be in pain and at one point would lash out at her only friend and the young boy would run off crying, before being attacked by a rabid dog which had also been used in the experiments. Seeing this, Shiro would jump down to save him, swearing to be his protector like the superhero they both idolized. During one experiment involving nanomachines, Shiro would develop a split personality to cope with the overwhelming pain. This personality would become known as the Wretched Egg. Eventually, Shiro would develop the ability to control her blood, and the researchers Sorei and Hagai Rinshiro would conduct further research, discovering she also possessed superhuman strength and a healing factor capable of repairing large chunks of her body. While Sorei would feel great remorse for putting Shiro through these experiments, Hagai's interest in her powers caused him to keep increasing the severity and frequency of the tests. During one test to determine how powerful her new abilities are, the researchers would decide to use a live target. Rather than attacking the animal, however, the Wretched Egg turned her powers on the staff, ripping them apart. It was at this time that Ganta would search for her and would walk in on the carnage before him. Horrified at what he saw, the boy would run away and would repress all memories of Shiro. Now having lost her only friend, Shiro would fall into a depression, and during this time she would discover the truth about her adoption and after learning that her healing factor could be taxed out, she would attempt to kill herself with her powers. The amount of power in the attempt to kill herself was so powerful it created an earthquake that sank 70% of Tokyo. However, she was unsuccessful and survived the attempt. This event would become known as the Red Hole. Shortly after this event, Sorei would create the Mother Goose system to keep the Wretched Egg from surfacing, and would then end her own life to prevent Hagai from using her to undo her own work. After this, Hagai would swap bodies and would have a facility created mainly to continue research on the Wretched Egg, but also to study the Deadman, humans that were infected by the Red Hole, gaining similar but much more limited powers. This facility would be named Deadman Wonderland, and it would be disguised as an amusement park prison hybrid to the outside world. Over the next 10 years, Shiro's life would continue as it is, with Shiro's mental state remaining like that of a child. At around this time, Hagai would reveal to the Wretched Egg that Ganta would be returning for a field trip. Seeing the opportunity to fulfill her own wish to die and Shiro's wish to see her friend again, the Wretched Egg would track Ganta down to his school and would slaughter his entire class before infecting him with a crystal of the Nameless Worm. Ganta would be framed for the massacre and would be imprisoned at Deadman Wonderland, where Shiro would track Ganta down by his scent. And after hearing him say that he wanted to die, she would try and kill him, but would see that that wasn't his true wish, even though he believed it to be. An attempt would then be made on Ganta's life, and during this attempt, he would awaken his branch of sin, saving both his and Shiro's life. The two would then spend the next couple of days together, with Shiro simply picking up their friendship where it had been left off, and Ganta doing his best to survive. On Ganta's third day of imprisonment, the Mother Goose system would suffer a malfunction, and the Wretched Egg would confront Ganta. However, after he attacked, she would determine that he was not strong enough to kill her and would leave. Ganta would then discover the existence of a hidden part of the system known as G, where the Wretched Egg was supposedly being held. They would then attempt to find this hidden part of the prison, where they would run into Ganta's friend and fellow prisoner, Yotakami. When the prison would be put into lockdown and a riot suppression robot would be sent out to kill Ganta. The group would then run, but would ironically be cornered outside of their original destination, where a man named Senji Kiyomasa would unintentionally rescue them when he destroyed the robot to settle an old score. Ganta Ganta would then mistake this man for the wretched egg and would attack, only for Senji to effortlessly disable Ganta and clear up the confusion as well as reveal the true nature of the facility. The man would then attack anyway, wanting to test Ganta before they would be forced to fight for real the next day, but the two would be sedated by prison guards. Shiro and Yo would then be separated from Ganta, but due to them both having someone they wish to find in the hidden part of the prison, they would immediately work on breaking back in. Yo, however, would use Shiro as a distraction while he tricked the higher-ups into believing that an uprising was occurring, in order to turn off the power and gain entry for himself. Unbeknownst to him, this would result in the Mother Goose system being deactivated, and the wretched egg would destroy everything around her before passing out. She would then awaken before Hagar, who would immediately challenge her to a fight to the death, and she would rip him apart, requiring him to once again transfer bodies. Shiro would once again track Ganta down, who was by now had joined a revolutionary group known as Scar Chain, and he would go out on a mission, leaving Shiro behind. However, Shiro would be informed by Hagar, who had taken the body of a powerful dead man known as Mockingbird, that Ganta was in possession of a hidden bomb meant to destroy the entire group by advanced guards known as Undertakers. Shiro would then get to Ganta and dispose of the bomb just before it would explode, but due to miscommunication, Ganta wouldn't realize and would lash out, hitting Shiro. Once again feeling depressed, Shiro would unknowingly get drunk off of alcoholic chocolates and would wander right into the Undertaker headquarters, and would be captured along with Scar Chain's second in command, and the two would be used as bait to draw out the group. Ganta as well as several other Scar Chain members would show up to rescue the two, and after a long fight, Ganta would awaken a second tier of his branch and would defeat the head Undertaker, allowing the remaining members of Scar Chain to escape, though he would stay in the facility with Shiro. The two would continue to spend time together, and during this time, Shiro would realize that she herself was a dead man. After this, the creation of artificial dead men known as forgeries would begin to kill off the dead men, until a group of original dead men, including Ganta, would confront the forgeries, but once Ganta realized one of his friends, Azami Mido, had been turned into a forgery, he would once again use his second tier branch to try and save Azami, but would injure the other dead men, gaining the ire of. After this, Shiro would meet back up with Ganta and would reveal her dead man status to him. Ganta would then act cold in an effort to protect Shiro, but she would realize what he had done and would track down Azami, and the two would help Ganta before being confronted by a forgery, who would torture Shiro to hurt Ganta, but the two would use a combined attack to kill the forgery. After this, they would admit their love for each other, and Shiro would pass out. Ganta would then leave Azami to watch over Shiro, but due to her experiencing too much pain, the wretched egg would force her way to the surface and would demand to know where Ganta had gone. Azami would refuse to tell her where Ganta had gone, and Hagar would appear and decapitate her. The wretched egg would then rampage through Deadman Wonderland before confronting Ganta with Azami's severed head, as well as insinuating that she had killed Shiro as well. Ganta would then attack, knocking off her mask and revealing that she and Shiro were in fact the same person. The prison would then be evacuated, and over the following months, the wretched egg would take control and would remain on the island until Ganta would return as part of a team to kill Hagar and the wretched egg in order to prevent a second red hole. As soon as Ganta returned, the wretched egg would greet him, and after a short confrontation, would leave. After determining that he would need Ganta's body to unleash the wretched egg's full power, Hagar would capture Ganta, and Shiro would approach, and Ganta would prepare to attack, before realizing that it was indeed Shiro who would break down and run away. Eventually, Hagar would be killed by Ganta, and the wretched egg would use the situation to her advantage, and would destroy the Mother Goose system, and in a showing of her power, would destroy a good chunk of the island. Ganta would then meet with Shiro, who would reveal all the pain she had been through since her birth, and that her wish was to be killed by the boy she loves. During this, Ganta would realize that the person he was talking to wasn't the wretched egg or the Shiro he knew. She would then confirm that the two previous personalities had merged and there was now only one Shiro. Ganta would then promise to fulfill her wish, and the two would fight. But by the fight's end, Ganta would save her life, having realized, though she believed dying was her true wish, that wasn't true, and she would confirm this, stating that she only wanted to be happy. Ganta would then forgive her, and the two would embrace, as their power would cause an explosion that would destroy the island. After a short time skip, Ganta would visit a comatose Shiro in a hospital. She would awaken ready to start her new life. Hello and welcome everyone to my first bonus episode where I will put two characters I've already featured against one another. Now, the reason this is not a standard scheduled episode is that due to all the research and editing being mostly done means that the amount of work on my part is less than a third of what I'd usually need to do, so I don't really feel right putting this out as a scheduled episode, as it is really just filler. Now, for the first of these bonus episodes, we'll call them, I will be putting Carnage against Shiro. Two psychotic, blood-wielding opponents who wouldn't spare a second thought about tearing apart anyone in between them or their goal. Or, well, really just for fun. Now, both of these fighters are from Season 1, and as I am reusing old footage, the same conditions I put them under before will apply here. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into it. Cletus Cassidy is a human male, presumably in his mid to late 30s, bonded with an alien symbiote capable of changing his physical attributes at will. such as his height, weight, and shape. For once, I actually have a solid number on a combatant's strength. Carnage has easily overpowered both Spider-Man and Venom at the same time, with Spider-Man generally being considered to be able to lift 10 to 20 tons, and Venom generally being able to lift about 70 tons, meaning at the very least, Carnage has been able to casually shrug off 80 tons of force. In terms of striking, Carnage has been shown to easily be able to inflict fatal damage even while holding back. When it comes to Carnage's speed, I will admit that I will not be taking every speed feat into account, as there are examples of them dodging attacks that are at least comparable to the speed of light. So for the purposes of fairness, I will be considering these feats as outliers and focusing on their more realistic feats. At standard, Carnage has been shown to easily be able to outmatch Spider-Man in terms of speed. Spider-Man has been shown to easily be able to dodge and counter bullets, can move faster than people can see, and has even dodged lightning from Electro. Carnage, in all my research, hasn't been shown to tire during combat, even when being hunted and fighting over extended periods of time. While Cletus's overall durability seems standard for a human, the symbiote is actually incredibly durable, being able to survive being ripped in half. It even kept Cletus alive while being left to orbit in space for a year. With a healing factor that seems to have no limit, as Carnage is capable of completely regenerated from having its head blown up by Deadpool, being beaten to a pulp by Venom, having Dr. Doom blast him, and even an explosion from a bomb meant to flash fry the human population of Earth, and can theoretically regenerate from a drop of blood. At the end of the manga, Shiro is a 15-year-old human female standing at around 5 feet 2 inches and likely weighing around 120 pounds. Due to being infected with the nameless worm parasite, her body is adapted to possess enhanced speed, strength, stamina, and a durability. Without her branch of sin, Shiro has been shown to be capable of breaking down a wall with ease, break through a metal pipe, and drop kicked a 12-ton robot, knocking it over. With her branch of sin, her strongest feat was tossing a military ship into the air. Now, while I can't determine the exact ship, the minimum weight for a Japanese battleship I could find was 240 tons. In terms of speed, Shiro is very fast, being capable of diving through a flurry of projectiles firing faster than the speed of sound, and with a branch of sin, she was able to stop automatic gunfire from a group of soldiers as well as 2 riot suppression robots. With stamina, it's safe to assume that her stamina has also been increased to superhuman levels by the nameless worm parasite, and this is supported by when she kept Ganta alive while also navigating the dog race, which was a glorified obstacle course of death. And by the end, Shiro didn't seem tired in the slightest. When it comes to durability, Shiro is incredibly capable, being shown to tank an attack, said to be able to kill a man in just a few hits with little damage, survived a hit from a sword that can rip through metal and with only some broken bones, lived through an explosion that destroyed Deadman Wonderland, as well as used an attack to try and kill herself that devastated Tokyo, resulting in an earthquake that sunk 70% of the city, but survived. She also possesses a healing factor capable of repairing broken bones, countering venom that makes people explode, and even replacing entire organs and body parts. Both Carnage and Shiro, thanks to their respective enhancements, could easily rip through normal people or even low-level heroes with ease, but between the two of them, one has the advantage with their limits. Starting with strength, at most Carnage could casually shrug off 90 tons, which, while dwarfing Shiro's standard 12-ton capabilities, isn't even half of her branch of Sin's casual throwing of 240 tons. Not to mention, this is while her abilities were still being limited, so I have no doubt her casual limit is much higher now. Before we get into speed, as you've seen, I do need to make a correction in terms of Carnage's speed. First of all, the Spider-Man I used to scale this feat is actually the superior Spider-Man, who, while sharing a body with standard Peter Park's Spider-Man, still has several feats I would consider to be outliers when compared to normal Spider-Man. Besides that, I severely underestimated how fast lightning actually travels at the time. I wrote this down and didn't really consider how much of an outlier it was. And finally, this was without a doubt aided by the spider sense and should not be considered an example of raw reaction speed. Now that I have that cleared up, speed should still be pretty easy to understand. While Shiro has an example of bullet timing, Carnage easily scales above this as he's faster than Spider-Man, who is a casual bullet dodger, and can even move faster than people can see. Really, the only way to argue that Shiro would be as fast or faster would be to claim that the Mother Goose system's destruction also boosted her physical abilities, but this is never stated or implied in the manga, so I will not be treating it as such. While I'm willing to bet stamina would go to Carnage, but as Shiro has never been shown to tire, I can't say for certain that he does have this advantage. But just know that if it really needed to come down to it, I'd give stamina to Carnage, as this is more an example of lack of evidence rather than me actually believing Shiro could keep up with Carnage for the same amount of time. Durability is pretty clear-cut. While Shiro has an example of surviving an island-busting explosion, Carnage survived what is at least half of a planet's surface-level bomb with similar results.
Now, there was some debate about this feat the last time I used Carnage, so let me explain my thoughts. Yes, it's true that this bomb most likely isn't going to create a literal explosion that would cover the surface of the planet, but the bomb would still need to be significantly more powerful than a standard nuclear weapon in order to cover the planet with the biological agent needed to wipe out humanity. In fact, how much has actually been calculated? And in order to cover the planet's surface, you would need more firepower than 15,000 SAR bombas, the most powerful nuclear weapon we know of to date. But again, this is just my view of this feat, and it's more than fine if you disagree with it. But it is where I will be going with for the purposes of this match. Finally, his regeneration is much faster than Shiro's, and he's been shown to heal much more severe injuries, with it even keeping him alive for a year while ripped in half in the vacuum of space. So while Shiro would outperform Carnage in pure strength and arguably match him in stamina, Carnage's durability would let him hold out for as long as he needs to, and his speed on top of that would let him deal more consistent damage while evading Shiro, while also wearing down her much weaker durability and regen. And it's for these reasons that Carnage gets the edge physically.
When it comes to Carnage's shape-shifting abilities, the only limit seems to be Carnage's imagination, as the symbiote has created anything from bladed weapons, to cages, to wings, to even a parachute. Though Carnage seems to prefer bladed weapons, it can also send out tendrils to trip up or rip apart its prey. Carnage also has the ability to absorb and convert organic material into more mass for the symbiote, which allows it to increase in size. Speaking of which, Carnage can also control pieces of the symbiote that have been separated from the main organism at will, to either take control of people or simply attack from more angles at once. The symbiote also serves as one big eye, meaning sneaking up on him is pretty much impossible. As stated before, the symbiote has a healing factor that seems able to heal from almost anything and extends to Cassidy. However, it isn't limitless, as after the two spent a year together floating in orbit, the symbiote had almost killed itself, keeping him alive. That and the symbiote does have a minor weakness to fire, but it doesn't seem to have the same effects as it would on other symbiotes like, say, Venom. The Deadman, Shiro is able to freely control her blood in any way she pleases, being capable of everything a standard Deadman can do and much more. Her most common use of her branch of sin is weaponizing her blood, and theoretically she should be able of making blades, whips, projectiles, shields, explosions, hallucination, fire, or any combination of the above, though she seems to prefer using projectiles. One unique way she manipulates her own blood is by lifting it while it's still inside her body, allowing her the power of flight. While under control of the Mother Goose system, her powers are greatly limited. However, once free, she was able to casually destroy 30% of Deadman Wonderland, and then the rest of it after a fight with Ganta. However, that pales in comparison to her strongest ability, which has been named the Red Hole, which was powerful enough to create an 11.4 earthquake that sunk 70% of Tokyo. Shiro also possesses incredible regenerative abilities, being capable of replacing organs, chunks of her body, and even reattaching limbs within moments.
This result should be familiar to my returning viewers, as this is the exact same outcome that happened the last time I used Carnage, just not in Carnage's favor this time. To be blunt, not only can Shiro do almost anything Carnage can, but she can do so much more on top of that with the ability to cause her branch of sin to explode, combust into flames, and even cause psychedelic effects like hallucinations or control the nervous system of her opponents by injecting her blood into them. And while she hasn't been shown to recreate the ability to absorb her opponents, the fact that she's packing far more firepower more than makes up for this. The only area where Carnage is definitively better is with his regeneration that is both faster and is proven to heal more serious damage, but that alone doesn't make up for the gap in power and quantity of their abilities. And so it is for these reasons that there's no question I give Shiro the edge in special abilities.
What Carnage lacks in any formal training, they more than make up for with their raw ferocity. Using a method of constant ruthless attacks, Carnage has been able to fight evenly with and even defeat several powerful and skilled superheroes, including Spider-Man, Deadpool, Venom, and even Captain America in combat. On his own, Cletus Cassidy is a seasoned and skilled serial killer, having spent years improving his killing method, and as such is very adaptable to many situations. Shiro's fighting style mainly consists of firing projectiles while keeping a good distance, and due to the acrobatics she constantly uses, her fighting style would best be described as Form 4 Ataru, which focuses on acrobatics and aggression, but depletes the user's stamina very quickly. Despite mainly using her branches or ranged weapons, Shiro has no qualms getting in close and personal to beat down and then. In combat, Shiro is constantly on the move, using her enhanced agility to weave in and out of her opponent's line of fire, confusing them before taking advantage and attacking. However, this run and gun technique is likely the only tactic she knows, as Shiro has never been in a situation where she needed to change up her approach, because even as a child, she was the most powerful living thing in her world.
Right, so before I get into this, let me just state that Carnage's fighting abilities are most likely a mixture of forms 4 and 1. The reason they weren't included during the breakdown is that I didn't apply lightsaber fighting forms to characters who didn't use sighted weapons at the time I used Carnage. Getting into it, really this category speaks for itself. While Shiro's acrobatic and ranged abilities are not a bad strategy, she lacks two very important edges she'd need to be effective: experience and speed. Starting with the slightly less important of the two, Shiro doesn't have anywhere near the same amount of combat experience that Carnage does, always having been stronger than the person she was up against and never truly needing to change her style, unlike Carnage, who has been forced to adapt new unorthodox strategies on the fly almost every time he's appeared in comics. Speed is a much bigger issue for Shiro, however. The whole point of a motion-oriented acrobatic fighting style is to outpace your opponent with speed and aggression. However, she falls behind in both departments when compared to Carnage, who uses a very similar melee-focused fighting style. Not to mention that, unlike Shiro, Carnage actually has learned how to engage in this type of combat from fighting superpowered heroes, unlike Shiro, who, as said before, has never even faced a challenge due to her power. So really, it's no question that Carnage gets the edge in combat abilities. Let's set up this fight. Let's say that it takes place in the Umbrella Nest facility where both Carnage and Shiro were being held, and that after the initial outbreak, they meet and start fighting. Carnage was having a really strange week. First, he fought that emo shapeshifter in New York, then he got captured by some nerds and they spent a few days experimenting on him. And now they're all zombies. However, at least now he could have a good time ripping them to shreds. This was his thought process as he crushed the skull of some big, tall, gray trenchcoat wearing man. But on second recollection, he didn't really care and let out a laugh of pure glee, enjoying the bloodshed. However, that didn't last long, as he used a bladed tendril to slash apart a skinless beast that threw at him from behind. Turning around, he saw a girl floating down from where he assumed the liquor had been thrown, with one of those plant things in her grip. Carnage watched her tilt her head at him with a bored expression before he'd call out, "You know, it's rude to just throw bodies at someone, right?" Shiro didn't react, still watching him with a bored expression. But, growing irritated, Carnage morphed his claw into a jagged blade before leaping up at her, saying, "Don't worry, Papa Carnage will teach us some manners." Shiro's face again didn't seem to react, but she threw the ivy at Carnage, who backhanded it away so hard its body was blown apart. And it's then that Shiro flies in, having used the ivy to distract him, and grabs him by the throat, before slamming him into the floor. Carnage uses the close contact to stab her between the ribs before his head hits the ground, splattering its contents across the sterilized lab floor. Shiro pulls the blade from her side, only to find that dozens of small tendrils have started to burrow into her flesh. And even more concerning is that Carnage's head was putting itself back together. Only a moment after realizing this, Carnage sits up to face her with a wild grin. "Didn't think I'd be done in that easy, did you?" Shiro tries to pull away, but the symbiote has a hold of her now and is drilling even further into her flesh, forcing her to take another approach. Using her already spilled blood, she creates a small ball in between them that quickly begins glowing. Carnage realizes she's attempting something and kicks her off, ripping out chunks of flesh as she pulls off of the tendrils from the force, and ends up kicking her through a reinforced door as the blood ball explodes, blasting apart Carnage's torso. As her bones snap back into place, Shiro sits up just in time to see Carnage reform while forming claws on his hands once again. Seeing that she was now in a large open room, she smirked and floated into the air above the door. Carnage jumps out onto the bridge, only to look up slack-jawed before muttering, "Oh, bullshit." Shiro doesn't respond and instead fires her blood at him, which he manages to evade, before stretching his arms out to try and grab at her, but Shiro simply flies to the side and catches a hand, and tries to use it to fling him off the railing, but to her shock he doesn't budge, and in fact pulls her down by retracting his arms. Shiro lets go in time to evade the blade, landing by his side and delivering a kick to his head that would decapitate a normal man. However, Carnage doesn't even flinch and manages to grab and snap her leg like a toothpick, causing the bone to rip out of the skin. Shiro doesn't even flinch, however, and instead uses the wound to shoot out blades, stabbing through Carnage's skull and freeing her leg. However, even this doesn't slow the symbiote down as it leaps up and tries to pounce on Shiro, who catches him just in time. The two struggle, with Carnage getting the upper hand. However, as his claws dig into her flesh, she gets an idea and covers her arms in her blood, mimicking his clawed hand, and easily overpowers him, snapping his wrists the same way he had snapped her leg, before punching straight through his chest, grabbing a hold of his heart. Carnage goes limp, still on her arm, but as she begins to relax, Carnage forms an axe on his foot and chops through her leg, knocking her down. The albino girl mutters a curse, seeing as this will be much harder than she thought, and using her severed leg as a sort of cannon, blows Carnage apart before placing her leg back on its correct spot, and runs down the hallway trying to think of a way to take him out. Carnage gives chase and rips through the nest, but loses her. He stalks through the hallway, passing Shiro's hiding spot, and as he does, Shiro leaps out to get the jump on him, only for him to spin around and catch her by the throat. She struggles in his grasp again, but now he uses his claw to dig into her jugular before ripping it out. Her blood sprayed like a fountain as Carnage laughed, but stopped as a twisted grin covered her face. "Well, now you've done it," she said, speaking for the first time as her blood rose up from the ground and formed jagged spikes that shot out, stabbing into Carnage, ripping away chunks of the symbiote, and even severing his arm. In retaliation, Carnage sends tendrils out to cut into her, and for a minute, the two simply rip away at each other, with Carnage having his jaw and guts ripped away, and Shiro missing both of her legs and needing to regenerate an eye. However, after a minute of this, Shiro feels herself start to slow down and forms a shield in front of Carnage to put her legs back where they belong. She just gets her limbs back before Carnage shatters the shield with a large tendril, revealing that the symbiote is now covering most of the room as well as some sort of living wall. Carnage would waste no time attacking, forming multiple Carnages around her. She managed to stop one from decapitating her by mimicking Hummingbird's whip wing and catching it before ripping it to shreds, but before long the others overwhelmed her, with one slashing open her stomach with a blade, another biting through her knee before a final one would rip off her arm and absorb it. In desperation, Shiro realizes that just like Carnage, her blood had been spilled throughout the room as well, and ignites all of the blood spilled from her body. And in an instant, the entire room lights up, and for the first time, Carnage reacts in pain, with the symbiote letting out a monstrous screech as Cletus swears up a storm, calling Shiro all sorts of colorful things. Shiro uses the distraction to limp out of the room, but as she does, she's impaled by the tendrils, and they drag her back into the room, with Carnage saying, "Oh no you don't. If I burn, you're burning with me, brat." Shiro may have been able to fight the tendrils before, but over the course of the fight, she's been worn down so much that she's pulled into her own flames and begins burning. In a last-ditch effort, she uses her blood as an explosive once again, this time creating an explosion so large it takes out the entire wing of the lab they were fighting in. Now in the rubble, Shiro crawls out, still missing an arm and leg, but is alive. She just barely gets to her feet when a chunk of metal is thrown into her, knocking her back down, as Carnage also stands right back up. Carnage walks to his prey, now showing Cletus's half-charred face instead of the symbiote, and the same half of his body is now skeletal, with that seemingly being all that the symbiote could protect. Carnage stomps over, now looking genuinely pleased for once. It had been a while since he's fought someone that could put up a good fight. It helps spice things up from the standard rip and tear of civilians. Shiro, knowing she couldn't stop what's about to happen, cracks another smile and starts laughing while thanking him for making her wish finally come true. Carnage doesn't give her words any thought, however, and with a swing of his blade decapitates her, ending the wretched egg once and for all. And with that, I declare Carnage, the blood symbiote, the winner. While not surprised by this result, I'll confess that I was actually rooting for Shiro, but no amount of mental gymnastics can make her the most likely victor of this fight without going out of my way to actively nerf Carnage. While Shiro is physically stronger to the point of nothing short of outliers putting Carnage above her, the speed and durability difference is actually a more favorable advantage for Carnage. Anyway, as he doesn't need strength to take Shiro out. It's also true that thanks to her special abilities hitting harder and having more variety, Carnage is shape-shifting. However, this is again not an advantage that Carnage needs to win, as there's nothing to suggest that Shiro would be able to survive something like decapitation or having her heart destroyed. So while more limited, Carnage is bringing more than enough to win the fight. Not to mention his better regen on top of his superior durability, widening this gap even further, and the final nail in the coffin being Shiro's non-existent combat skills, which are obviously no match for someone who regularly goes toe-to-toe with Spider-Man, Venom, and other highly skilled Marvel heroes. While Shiro had the arsenal needed to take Carnage down, there were simply too many factors keeping her from being able to secure a win, including speed, combat abilities, and most importantly, Carnage's ridiculous amount of durability and regeneration. While true that Shiro could burn away at Carnage and do some damage, she simply wasn't packing enough of a punch to take him out before he does the same to her. Even Shiro's Red Hole, which ice scaled above Lucy's island busting punch, which according to Death Battle is comparable to a nuke, is much weaker than the Gene Bomb would need to be to cover the planet. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that Carnage would be too much for Shiro to handle, or do you think that the Wretched Egg's superior firepower would blow away this symbiote? Let me know in the comments down below if I got anything wrong. Please feel free to correct me. Also, just giving another shout out because I like shouting out these users. Both the content creators 3 Topics Gamer and Winter Ghost are 2 amazing YouTubers who also have their own Versus series, which are both actively being updated. So if you enjoy my content, please go check them out, as 3 Topics Gamer was actually the series to inspire my own, and Winter Ghost, despite being newer to the scene, is more than worthy of your time to check out. Again, links in the description if you'd like to see their channels. Right, well, I wasted enough time. I'm gonna go work on my real matchup. See y'all later.